Hello everybody, welcome to the class. My name is Dr. Porta. I will guide you today through a demonstration of some of the different historical instruments in the development of the guitar. Joining me here today we have George Ramirez. He's a local performing artist and music instructor, and he's very familiar with this type of repertoire and instruments. So George, before we segue to the piece that you're going to demonstrate for the students, can you tell us a little bit about the instruments that you have at hand?
Yeah, so there's a few particular differences from this small style of guitar, or the one that you're holding, from the modern guitar that we have today that's much bigger. And you'll notice that it's much smaller, and it's about half the size than a regular guitar. And I would say probably a little bigger than a ukulele. But you'll notice that the scale is much smaller, and the neck is going to be a lot more narrow, so your hands kind of fall off the ends of the fretboard sometimes. And these guitars were usually a little more decorated than the guitars that we see today. You know, yours has the cool mustache bridge. Yeah, as well as this one. And the difference between these two is mine's more French style, because it's based off of La Côte, which is from France, and this guitar is more Viennese style from Austria. So just depending on the region, you would have different shapes of guitars, different colors even from the lacquer. And most of these guitars, unlike today, are from white wood or blonde wood, what they call. So it could either be maple or cypress, or these kind of thinner woods we would consider nowadays, where they use a lot darker woods.
That's great. And around what time period were these guitars were played? Yeah,
so for my guitar, this one's around 1750, but they started making these guitars in the 17th century, essentially. And they went up until the end of the 17th century. And within that time frame of about a century, they started getting a little bigger and a little bigger as time went on.
And can you tell us about the size? So why the guitars got a little bit bigger? What was the reasoning behind it?
Yeah, so the guitar is basically like a small box. We see it as this really nice shape, you know, figure 8, but it's a small box that pushes out air. And as luthiers started developing different techniques, they decided, you know, if you just have more air inside that box, you're probably going to get a louder sound. And so the Spanish guitarists, or Spanish luthiers rather, started making these guitars a lot bigger. And some of them were even bigger than what we know as modern guitar today.
That's very good. So you're going to play a piece for us to demonstrate how your lovely guitar sounds. Can you tell us the name of the piece and a little bit of history about it?
Yeah, so I'll be playing a piece by Mauro Giuliani, and it's called Opus 107. And the little dub nickname for it is the Harmonious Blacksmith.
And there's a story behind it, right? It's a nickname of the piece that was attributed later, but was not really something the composer intended to.
Yeah, so during this time, because the internet and computers were not around, it was pretty easy to take other people's work and republish it or use it for your own publishing company. And so a lot of Giuliani's works, along with other people, got published by people who might have been alive after, you know, his lifetime, and they dubbed it, you know, Harmonious Blacksmith, or it could be whatever nicknames they wanted to give it at the time. Just
they felt like it would fit better.
It would fit better. It's more attractive to the player to give it a kind of a scenic background.
And Giuliani, that sounds Italian. Where was Giuliani from?
Yeah, so Giuliani is Italian, born in a small province called Bari. And he didn't stay there for very long. He ended up moving to Vienna. But he did come back to Italy later in his life, and he spent the last years of his life in Naples.
Okay, so is the piece that you're going to play for us in an Italian style, or what's the form of the piece?
Yeah, so this piece is specifically a theme and variations on Handel's work, which he's a baroque composer from probably only, you would think, 50 to 100 years before Giuliani.
Okay.
So this is kind of an oldie for Giuliani, and he's setting kind of a study for his students or anybody who plays it to play different guitar techniques in each theme or variation rather. And you could probably think of this as a popular tune of the time, so people probably would have known what this was. For us, it sounds a little unfamiliar, but once you hear the variations go through the second or third time, the tune kind of gets stuck in your head.
Yeah, it has an earworm effect as you play it.
Definitely.
Well, now you're going to hear George Ramirez playing theme and variations by Handel, composed by Mario Giuliani in the romantic guitar. Thank you, Jerry, for playing that lovely piece for us. It was a great interpretation. So now we're going to switch to the baroque guitar. So this is a predecessor of the classical guitar. And later in the video, you're going to see a demonstration of the same piece, but playing the three different instruments so you can hear the different timbre qualities that each instrument has. So this guitar, if we compare it to the romantic guitar, this is earlier. This is around the 1600s in Spain. So something that's very interesting that was going during this time is we also have the lute. But in Spain, they didn't use the lute compared to other countries in Europe, mostly because the lute was connected to the Moors, and Spain had nothing to do with that after they sent the Moors out of Spain. So in Spain and Italy, the guitar was highly developed, and this is the guitar that it was being used during that time. And if you look at them, about the size, they're very similar, but there's a lot of subtle differences. If we look at the romantic guitar, we have 6 string, which is what we have in modern guitars, and over here, we have 9 strings. And the way the strings are set up, we have a single string, and then all the strings after that are doubled. And the reason for that, it was a very common practice that because the instruments were not very loud, if you wanted to have more volume, they would add more string to them. And this is a little bit of it's a little bit trickier to play, but once you get used to it, it has a really nice kind of bright and a melodic sound. What other difference can you see from this guitar? So if we look at the bridges, in the previous guitar, this one's straight and the other one had a mustache. And this one, actually, the strings are completely tied into the bridge. There's no saddle compared to the romantic and the classical guitars. And if we flip them over, you can see that the guitar still hadn't developed the curvy shape that is known for today. It was a little bit more flat and straightforward. The other thing compared to modern guitars are the pegs. And both the baroque guitars and the classical and romantic guitars, they use pegs same as the violin. They don't use tuning machines like we use in modern guitar, which makes it really, really hard to keep in tune. The other thing that we have is that if you look at the fretboard, where the frets are in the guitar, this is a separate piece. But in the Baroque times, the fret will be part of the top. Instead of having a separate piece on top of the guitar, it will go just kind of straight. So it's a little bit harder to play, and this one particularly, needs some setup to have. So both of these guitars are replicas, so they have some modern additions that make them a little bit easier to play and to not deal with the difficulties that they had in the past. So in the past, both of the guitars would have gut strings, gut from cats or goats or whatever animal was available at the butcher shop. Now they're the nylon strings. And the other thing is the frets were also made out of guts. And in both of these guitars, the frets are made out of steel, which makes it a little bit easier to stay in tune and to be played. This guitar at some point did have gut frets. You can see kind of like the marks of it, but then it was just kind of refretted just to make it a little bit more playable. So now I will show you 3 different examples of the same piece playing 3 different historical instruments. First, you're going to see the Baroque guitar. Second, you're going to see it in the romantic guitar. And the third, you're going to see it in the modern classical guitar. So I want you to pay attention to the different timbre, the different sounds, and the different quality of these 3 instruments. The piece will be Españoleta by the Spanish composer Gaspar Sanz. So you just heard three different examples of the same piece playing different instruments. So now we want to demonstrate for you the modern classical guitar, and then we'll have a short discussion about the different sound qualities from each instrument. So if we compare the modern classical guitar to the baroque guitar, you can see there's a big difference in change, not only in how thick and wide the guitar is, but also on how long it is. Now, we mentioned before the pegs and the tuning machines. So let's show them real quick what they look from the side, right? So the pegs work by friction, same as the violin, and all the violin family to this day still use this system. But for modern guitars, both classical and electric, we use tuning machines. You know, it has gears that makes it a little bit easier to work. These peg tunings, they tend to go out of tune very fast. The other thing that we have, if you look at the center, the sound hole is way bigger compared to the baroque guitar, and it's highly decorated. This one actually is kind of simplistic because it follows the Torres tradition. It was a simple design. But if you look at the baroque, it's highly decorated, and on occasions there will even be like 3Ds, you know, that will go into the guitar, which is pretty cool. So let's show them the back of the guitar. Now, because this is a modern replica, you can see that it took some of the similar designs of modern guitars. Originally, they wouldn't be made out of Indian rosewoods.
You could also notice on the guitars, just in the back of the neck, over time, you know, we have issues with these old guitars. They tend to warp from the neck. And you could see in modern guitars, they were starting to, even in the Spanish, mid-19th century, they were already starting to add structural points.
Reinforcements.
Yeah, reinforcements in their necks. So that could be ebony, or it could be sometimes even truss rods, which is metal, or now carbon plating.
Fiber, yeah. So let's talk about the different sound quality. One of the things that really affects the sound of the guitar is the top of the guitar. If we were to play the guitar and just kind of put our hands on top of it, we'll be muting the instruments. Most of the sound is produced in the top. Now, what alters the sounds is the guitar, is the materials that they choose. If they have, you know, rosewood, cedar, or spruce, the depth of the guitar, right, and the different details embracing inside of the guitar. Usually, the bigger the guitar is, sounds a little bit fuller, a little bit bassier, and this one, because it's smaller, sounds a little bit thinner and bright. Let's show them, for example, just playing the first string of each guitar so you can hear them next to each other. So this would be a modern guitar. This one actually was made in Spain in 2002. Okay, so it's not out of tune. It's tuned in a different tuning, so it's closer to the baroque tuning.
That's right.
So you see, this one's a little bit fuller, and that one just a little bit thinner and brighter.
Yeah, and you could also notice the guitars changed through the centuries as well. As we mentioned, this is a baroque instrument that wasn't used as a main instrument. It was more to accompany people, mostly singers and violins. These are not very loud other instruments to play with. And we didn't play a lot of, bass lines when we were baroque guitarists back then, because we don't have bass strings, right? And the guitar, through the Romantic period, classical period, and what we know today, ended up getting these wound bass strings, and that helped us be able to accompany different instruments and to imitate the piano. Having this alternating bass line going on was finally accomplishable for us when we got that.
The other thing that you could notice in those three videos, especially between the Giuliani piece and the Gaspar Sanz, is that in the earlier times, everything was, like you said, based on chords to get a fuller sound. But when you play the Giuliani, that was more polyphonic, right? You have bass lines, you have chords, you have a melody. As music got more complex, they needed different instruments to reflect that in the music. And now in modern guitars, you can play every type of music, different melodic lines, bass line, and in these guitars were not really as possible. it had this limitation because of the size and projection. So let's show them real quick if I played my lowest string, how it sounds, and what happens if I play the lowest string. So see, this is a very thin sound, and you say it was made to kind of to project and just to accompany each other. During the Baroque time, mostly the popularity of the guitar was because it's such a portable instrument. They could go from town to town, as the troubadours did, just kind of sharing the news by playing the guitar. So that's one of the reasons was the instrument of choice. And even to this day, a lot of Bohemian and Protestants are still using the guitar as the instrument. Well, thank you so much, George, for coming and helping us with this discussion. It was a great addition to the class.
Thank you for having me.
Well, students, there you go. You have 3 different early historical instruments that you can use as a reference. Thank you.